1, 2, 3. Are we good?
We have quorum, yes, ma'am. We are ready to rock and roll.
Good evening, everyone. We are ready to call this meeting to order. Tonight's is the called HB581 hearing by the CCSD Board of Education. This is the second of 3 hearings that are required to be held prior to the board taking any official action on House Bill 581. As a reminder to the public, this is not an official decision as to which way the board will decide on House Bill 581. This is simply a hearing to hear from the public, and each member of the public will have 3 minutes to present once we finish our presentation and begin public comment. So we will begin with roll call. Superintendent Hooker.
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Heidi Hensley.
Here.
Ms. Mary P. Bagby. Ms. Linda Davis. Dr. Patricia Yeager. Mr. Tim Denton.
Here.
Dr. Mumby Anderson.
Here.
Dr. Lakeisha Gant. Ms. Nicole Hull. And Mr. Mark Evans.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum, and we can move on to our 3rd agenda item to approve the agenda as presented. I need a motion.
Make a motion that we approve the agenda as written.
I'll second it.
All right, motion made by Mr. Evans, seconded by Ms. Hensley. All in favor of moving forward with the agenda as presented, raise your hand high, say aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion is approved. And now we will move to item 4, the HB 581 presentation by Mr. Chris Greiner, our Chief Financial Officer.
Now you're on.
We're good. All right. Good evening. Thank y'all. So this is basically the same presentation as the first hearing. I did tweak it a little bit just to add the additional date because I know we've had to change that date once because of weather. Now we've changed it once. So I'll go over that when we get to it. Let me make this. Okay. Got it. All right, so just a quick overview again of House Bill 581. House Bill 581 passed on November 5th in the general election. Keeping in mind a homestead is the primary residence of a homeowner. So what House Bill 581 does is establishes a statewide floating homestead exemption that limits the annual increase in property tax assessments to the inflation rate of the previous year. As we discuss numbers in a little bit, we don't know what that inflationary rate is. Our numbers are based on the Consumer Price Index. The State Revenue Commissioner will ultimately set that rate, and he is, I have not seen any guidance on that yet from the State Revenue Commissioner. So for example, if a home increases in value 5%, it gets assessed at 5% higher by the tax assessor, but the previous year's inflation rate is 2%, then that home would only be valued at 2% more. We are fortunate here in Athens, Clarke County that we have an exemption, SC, at the age, and this is a school-based exemption, at the age of 65, school tax-based exemption, excuse me. At the age of 65, homeowners in Clarke County may apply for an exemption that freezes the assessed value of their property. So therefore, House Bill 581 would only apply to this group, would not apply, excuse me, to this group of homeowners unless there's a change in the millage rate. The only way they ever get affected with their taxes is if there's either millage rate goes down, millage rate goes up. So House Bill 581 has no effect because their property value is frozen. All existing exemptions, school district would remain the same regardless of the decision on House Bill 581. Based on our information and everything I've seen, school systems have this one opportunity to opt out. I think I reminded the board the same decision was made back in the 80s with Social Security, whether school districts stayed in Social Security or opted out. We decided to stay in. Some neighboring counties, Coney, Gwinnett, decided to opt out of Social Security. And that was a one-time opt-in or opt-out back then as well. Just a quick recap of our school system finances for the FY25 budget. Property taxes account for roughly 57% of our general fund revenue. Our budget for property taxes this year is $135 million. That's based on a millage rate of 18.8 mils. Keeping in mind the cap, statutory cap is 20 mils. 1 mil of tax is equivalent to roughly about $7.2 million right now. So this chart that we've discussed several times basically takes a look at what if House Bill 581 had been in effect the last 6 years. It's just making that assumption. Again, the fifth column over, the CPI for the previous year, we're using Consumer Price Index. So for 2024, that was a little over 4%. So the loss in revenue for the school district would have been a little bit over $1 million. If you adjust the CPI down to 2%, it would have been about $1.5 million. If you look at the whole 6-year period, it would have been about $7.4 million less revenue for the school district. So what are the pros of House Bill 581? It does reduce the tax burden for homeowners who do not already qualify for the exemption SC. Pros of opting out. Local control, I mean, it does influence our ability to work with local legislators to kind of craft our own tax exemptions maybe in the future to tailor our tax rates to meet specific community needs as well. You know, with the loss in revenue, there's always potential to increase the millage rate to make up for that lost revenue, and that would shift the tax burden to our businesses and our rental properties, which ultimately would affect our renters here in Athens-Clarke County. So other considerations as we look towards the FY26 budget, which we're working on as a staff right now, we'll have that to you in the next several months. Potential further health insurance cost increases. The governor's proposed budget for FY26 does include increases for both our certified staff and our classified staff. Certified is basically covered through our Quality Basic Education Act, which is our funding mechanism in the state of Georgia. Unfortunately, classified is not covered, so that does come from local property taxes to fund that. So we're looking at about a based on the governor's proposed budget for Clarke County School District, about a $3.4 million increase in the FY26 budget for classified health insurance at this time. Are there chances that may get reduced? It did last year. The House and Senate got together and came up with a lower amount. Right now, that's the only number we have is from the governor at this point. They're meeting in their appropriation committees, and they'll start working on the FY26 budget soon. Any additional future property tax legislation? Last year, there were a couple other bills that did not make it. I'm sure, we haven't seen any circulate yet, but there is always that potential. Any additional reductions in federal funding? We did have a slight reduction in our Title I funding this past year. I know y'all have probably read some of the federal funding stuff going on today, which we've been told would not affect Title I or special education funding, but we don't know what that's going to look like for next year's funding. And there's always, I think Mr. Evans brought this up at the last hearing, potential impacts of the Georgia Promise Scholarship Program, which the state, is rolling out. We don't know what impact it's going to have on the school district yet, as we could potentially lose enrollment, which we would also lose funding along with that enrollment. So next steps, we do have one more public hearing, which we have moved to Thursday, February the 6th at 6 p.m. And then we have a board meeting on Thursday, February the 13th, at 7 p.m., where the decision will be made by y'all as a board whether to opt out of House Bill 581. There's no action required if you want to stay in House Bill 581. We're in it right now. So the only decision is whether to opt out. And then if the board decides that's the direction they want to go in, we'll create a resolution which would be approved at that board meeting. And then that supporting documentation has to be sent to the Secretary of State by March 1st. And I will be happy to answer any questions y'all might have.
Thank you, Mr. Greiner. Do members of the board have questions? Mr. Denson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you again for this presentation, Mr. Greiner. And so I know we talked about one of the things with like the local control that by doing this, it's a very blunt tool while this board could be working with the state legislators to create homestead exemptions that are modeled for what the needs of this community are. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct. There is one example of a district who did do that this past year. I'll mention, it's Forsyth County Schools actually modeled their own kind of House Bill 581 where they set the inflationary rate in there at a set amount that stays that amount for the next 11 years, but that allows them some budgetary control because they know what that rate's going to be where it doesn't fluctuate each year. So.
Okay. And you know, one of the things I know we've talked about in this body a little bit here and there, which the county has done, is a low-income homestead exemption, which I would love for us to maybe have those conversations with the state legislature about creating an exemption that does help the low-income homeowners here in this county that do need some help. But the folks who are, you know, bringing in 6, 7 digits and such, who might not need the same kind of help to stay in their homes, we can model a little bit so it's not just a really blunt tool that does everything. So I think by us having that own discussion amongst ourselves of what kind of homestead exemptions we think Athens-Clarke County needs is a much better approach than taking this very blunt tool. Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Excuse me.
Are there others? Ms. Hensley?
So in your, and I should have asked this last time, but I was thinking about it. In your last presentation, you were talking about pros of opting out, and you were talking about the impact, like a huge portion of our budget that's not in QBE and those type of federal funding that does come from this property tax goes to our certified employees. Not necessarily. Maybe I misunderstood that.
Right, the QBE funding for quality basic education funding formula, Ms. Hensley, actually is geared towards certified staff for the most part. The property tax piece really helps with our maintenance and operations.
That's what, I meant the opposite.
Right,
Classified.
with our classified transportation, health insurance for our classified employees, right.
And so like we took a lot of strides in trying to get those classified employees where we wanted them to be with the extra raise this year, better help, you know, putting more into their retirements, putting more into their health. That's what would be kind of affected here.
Right, that is correct. And the retirement piece and the health insurance are totally, really out of our control. Those are set. The retirement piece is set for TRS, is set by a state board. Y'all were very forward thinking a couple years ago. We did create a match in our 403B plan for our classified employees, and we've continued that. I think we're one of the first districts in the state of Georgia to do that. And then health insurance is totally out of our control. It's set by the governor in the budget, and then of course it goes through the House and Senate, and it's eventually passed as part of the budget. But so TRS and health insurance, we have absolutely no local control over that at all.
Right.
It's a state. So.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I had it backwards. I meant the classified employees.
Right.
Are the ones that come, more of our budget comes through these property taxes.
Right, that is correct.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
that was my question.
Are there other questions? Mr. Evans?
Hey, Chris.
Hey, Mr. Evans.
So I need some help here with some understanding.
Okay.
Okay. So the assessment, we don't do the assessment. The county does the assessment.
That is correct. The tax assessor, yes, there's a board of tax assessors, and there's actually a tax assessor, Mr. Kurt Dunnigan here in Athens-Clarke County.
Okay. And so if we opt out, are there going to be two separate ways of calculation? Or do we get our number from what the county assesses of my property?
They will, say Athens-Clarke County decides to stay in House Bill 581, there will actually be two different values assessed at that point, for one for county purposes and one for school district purposes. And it works that way with a lot of exemptions now. The county has some exemptions that are a little bit higher than the school district. School district has SC 65, which the county does. The county has a variation of it, but it's floating. Ours is floating based on, the property gets frozen. So there are every school district I've been in, there are different variations like that.
See, I'm really confused by this law. I've spent a lot of time reading it and talking with folks. And I don't understand how this affects us as much as it would the local. Because we only control the millage rate, correct?
Right, but I think with the exempt, like say here's the difference. I think Mr. Denson brought this out last time. Local government was given the option, they can actually do it's a floss, it's like a splosh, but it's a floss, but it's a local option sales tax. So they have the ability, if they, say Athens-Clarke County stays in House Bill 581, with all three municipalities, which is Bogart, Winterville, Athens-Clarke, they can all vote to do a local option sales tax for 1 cent. And that's how they're gonna make up the difference that they might lose from House Bill 581. The House Bill 581 did not grant school districts that option. It was only for local municipalities that were granted that option. So their process is a little bit different, I think, in their thinking. And I mean, again, I'm not, that would be how I haven't heard that directly from them. I don't think Dr. Hooker's heard that directly from them. But in my thinking, I've heard it, other districts talk about, there is that additional option for local municipalities. So.
Yeah, it just seems like we're really kind of limited already to what we control. We control the millage rate. So whether, if it goes up to 2% on my house, isn't that what the value is going to be assessed anyway for us? And then we have to work on the millage rate that way?
Well, what House Bill 581, but say the tax digest like last year, it went up, say 8-9%. On your house, it would only, if House Bill 581 is in effect for school district purposes, it would only be, let's say 2%. It would only go up 2%, so we would be losing the additional 7% roughly that it would have went up. So and then, if we decide to not opt out, if we opt out of 581, then your house would go up 9% for school district purposes. If Athens-Clarke County stays in 581, theirs would only go up 2%. So, I mean, in talking to the tax assessor, it's going to be a lot of fun either way for him, because there's going to be, it's all done with the computer software, but the software has got to be programmed, and there's a lot of moving pieces with it. So.
And I tend to think of myself as a pretty smart guy, and I'm trying hard to understand really what our role here is, because it seems as if things are really kind of stacked against our taxpayers a bit, in that they're really not going to know one way or the other, and then on top of that, we also have to think about the challenges that we're going to be facing with, the people who pull out with the vouchers.
Right.
So I'm wondering, are we making our lives harder with opting out than opting in? And I don't know the answer to that question. That's why it's important that the people are here to talk with me, because I admit that I don't know everything. And so I'm hoping that we can get some clarity from that, because it just seems wacky that there would be these two different systems, and the confusion would be monumental.
It's, like I said, from the tax assessor, it's going to be very challenging either way. I think across the state, that same decision's being made. I haven't really followed what other local municipalities are doing. I've kept up with what school districts, and I think it's 70 to 80% of school districts at this time are having hearings with the intention of opting out. I think most local municipalities, like I said, I haven't really kept up with that side. I don't think they are, because they have the additional revenue they could potentially raise by staying in. It does create two systems. There's a lot of that anyhow already with the exemptions. And again, it's done with the software, but it creates a challenging environment for the tax assessor as far as calculating. So.
I'm confused, and I have access to.
Could I take a crack at it? Because I do represent counties and cities and tax assessors as well. So it's important to understand this is actually an exemption, not a direct impact on assessed value. So the tax assessor's office will assess all values at 100% fair market value, as they always do. But then they will have to do an alternate calculation of what the value would be if it were if the increase were capped by the inflation rate. And if there's a difference, then that's an exemption amount, and it's applied just like all the other homestead exemptions. And just like all the other local homestead exemptions, it can apply just to school, just to county, just to city, or any combination thereof. Everybody has the option of doing their own exemptions. For schools, it's a little different. So that will set the base rate. So you'll take that amount, you'll take that value, then they do a 40% calculation for historical reasons, and then so that gives you your tax amount. So then you set the millage rate, and the millage rate is applied against. So you multiply the millage rate times the value as modified by this new homestead exemption, and then that's your dollars collected. Now, school districts, all but 4 in the state of Georgia, and you're not one of the 4, are capped at 20 mills. So now you have lower values, so you have a lower amount you're multiplying your millage rate by. Once you get to 20, that's going to be the max you can do. Cities and counties don't have caps. So that's one of the differences there, and why, you get to make an independent decision from the county's decision. According to the Georgia Department of Revenue website, there are already 36 counties that have some version of a valuation freeze exemption like this, or sometimes it's called a base year valuation exemption. So it's already in practice in at least 36 counties. I'm sure in most, if not all of those, it's aimed at a narrower set of homeowners based on age or income or some other status. This state one is being, it doesn't have those limitations. It's all residences, all homesteads, so there's no age or income limitation on this one. It applies to everybody. I don't know if that helps or not, but that's the background.
Thank you, and it does. It's just, I have access to all this information. I have access to you, and I'm confused still. We've been talking about this since November the 6th, and this arbitrary deadline of March the 1st by the legislature seems, doesn't allow for really thoughtful contemplation about what does this actually mean, and, so that's where I'm coming from. Thank you, Mr. Greiner.
Yes,
Thank
sir. Thank
Mr.
you.
Pruitt.
Thank you, Mr. Pruitt.
Okay. Ms. Bagby?
I would like to know, what is it that the children are going to lose if we opt in on this bill? What are they going to gain if we opt out? If we opt out, are they still going to have to pay $13,000 to rent a gym that's already here at this facility where we are holding our meetings? Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I think that's, those are decisions that will be made with the FY26 budget. I think, Ms. Bagby, I think it's, you look at the potential lost revenue, you may have to, right now we've been fortunate to have smaller class sizes. We may have to look at increasing, class sizes. I think there's a lot of, if we stay in, if we opt out, I think it just kind of makes us relook at, I think the opting out would allow us to, look at some of these increases that are what we call unfunded mandates from the state of Georgia, like health insurance and some of those items. Again, looking at, I think as we put together the FY26 budget, that's where of course, our focus is always on students, and we want to keep it there. So I think that's a great question. I think it's just looking at the potential lost revenue. How does that impact? It could be, reducing staff, increasing class size could be the potential there. And if you opt out, you have that additional revenue, which you could maybe do some of the stuff like you mentioned, where we don't necessarily increase cost or reduce cost on some other items.
Are there any other questions that you had, Ms. Bagby? Okay. I'd like to ask one follow-up question to what Ms. Bagby just asked. So remind me if I'm wrong, but we had about a 15% decrease in federal funding from our last fiscal year to this fiscal year. Is that right?
Probably somewhere in the 10 to 15, just with our Title I. Mostly it was Title I. We basically lost around $1 million, so I'm trying to think of our total federal. Yeah, a little over 10%,
Okay.
roughly. So, and a lot of that had to do, we also had school improvement grants that the state had been granting for a couple of our schools that fell under that category. That funding completely went away this year at every school district in the state of Georgia. So that was another pocket of money that we had to try to move around this year with some general funds to cover that as well.
Okay. And then with inflation, we've seen about three.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know that some of the board members have time limitations and some members of the public may as well, so we probably need to move on as quickly as we can to allowing the public to speak.
Okay. Because we have to be done by 7?
No, because this is really a public hearing for you to hear from them, not them to hear from you.
Okay. We don't get very many opportunities to ask Mr. Griner these questions in a public space because we haven't had the time since this legislation was passed.
I'm not going to argue with one way or the other. I was just making that point. Y'all handle it how you want to.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Pruitt. So my last question then was, I lost my train of thought. Federal funding.
Right, your old federal
Okay.
funding.
Okay, and so with the voucher program being implemented in this same legislative session, we are also looking at potentially losing QBE funding based on potential decreases in enrollment.
That is correct.
Okay,
QBE funding will actually be based on the October count, which we just had. So FY26 won't be, but then there's also the midterm adjustment. We could lose money at the midterm.
okay,
There is a hold harmless with midterm that you can't receive less revenue that was already budgeted. I think with that, it's probably more of an FY27 concern. And honestly, there's still so much going around as what qualifies, what schools would be affected. That I know there's still a lot of talk at the at the state level, at the governor's office on how all that's going to look. So I think the first impacts we would probably have from that is probably FY27 with our QBE, because QBE funds in arrears. So actually our funding for next year is set on our October count.
okay,
But then it'll get, midterm is where it gets adjusted and trued up to what the actual count is. And when I say midterm, the governor, when he does his budget, he does 2 budgets. One's a midterm budget, which is halfway through the year. And then he does the next year's budget. So in that midterm budget, that's where they reallocate all the numbers for all the school districts. We've been fortunate the last couple of years to get additional funding through midterm. And it's just based on your FTE number. So,
okay. Thank you.
all right, thank you.
And I just want to iterate, it's really important for the public, I think, to hear the funding decisions that are made by the district, that the board approves, when they're also having an opportunity to present their thoughts and opinions on this House Bill 581. This is all real-time decision-making. This was passed down to the board 2 months ago. And so we're getting this information in real time, just like you all are. So we appreciate your patience as we ask the questions that we needed to ask so that we're better informed. Thank you, Mr. Pruitt. Okay, now we will move on to item 5 for public comment. And I will just read our policy, policy BCBI on public comments before we move forward with our speakers. Each individual speaker will have up to 3 minutes to speak, and at this point, remarks must be concluded. No speaker will indulge in personal attacks, and all comments are to be addressed directly to the Board of Education. To protect the privacy of students, speakers shall refrain from identifying specific students by name. No individual or group shall be retaliated against in any manner for speaking during public participation. Personal concerns may be addressed in writing to the superintendent and the president of the Board of Education, and written copies of comments may be provided to the board. At a board meeting, board members will not respond to questions or comments from the public. The district may respond to public input as needed or appropriately within 10 working days. And lastly, the use of obscene, profane, vulgar, physically threatening, or abusive remarks will not be allowed. Loud and boisterous conduct or comments by speakers or members of the audience are also not allowed. And now we will move on to our list of speakers. And these are the individuals who called in, emailed, or signed up at the start of the, or before the start of the meeting. So if you're not on this list, just sit tight and we'll try to get to you after we go down the list of speakers. First, we have Claire Suggs.
Good evening. My name is Claire Suggs, and I'm a Clark County taxpayer, and I'm a CCSD parent. I am here tonight to urge you to opt out of House Bill 581. The district faces many known financial pressures. One already noted by Mr. Greiner is the escalating cost of health insurance for classified employees. For many years, the state and school districts partnered to share this cost. But in 2012, the state legislature eliminated state funding for health insurance for classified employees. These funds have not been restored. The cost of providing health insurance for these employees rose from $296 per member per month in 2012 to the current level of $1,580. And as Mr. Greiner noted, it is set to climb to $1,885 per member per month. I'd also like to note that the QBE formula is not adjusted for inflation, leaving districts to cover the cost of rising costs. To cite one example of this, in 1986, when the QBE formula was implemented, the district received $150 per teacher to cover the cost of substitutes for 8 days. This works out to $18.75 per day. How much is the district receiving now, 40 years later? $150 per teacher, or $18.75 per day. Another significant gap in state funding is for mental health professionals. The state funds one social worker for every 2,475 students. The recommended ratio is one social worker for every 250 students. We see a similar gap in funding for school psychologists. Other areas in which there are significant gaps include student transportation and technology. These are some of the known financial challenges that Clark County schools and districts across the state face. We do not know what lies ahead. If you do not opt out of House Bill 581, you will constrain your ability and the ability of future boards to adapt, to unforeseen financial challenges. I urge you to opt out of House Bill 581. Thank you.
Next up is Catherine Steggs.
I ask that you do not opt out. I spent my career in Middle Georgia as a senior manager for a department for a civil engineering firm that consulted with facilities all over the state. And I'm convinced that impact fees are the way to fund public services that are based on the explosion of population and growth, because impact fees are levied on the growth. And that raises, if they're properly applied, and I know you can't level them, I know the county has to do it. But I think there has to be an outcry and a pressure, because that's where so many of our expenses are coming from, not just for schools, but for roads, the traffic problems. So leaving the Board of Education sort of on their own to scrabble up money when the community as a whole needs to pull together and have the people causing the growth pay for the services that growth entails. I am a homeowner in Clark County, and I'm opposed to my taxes to continue going up because so much of the growth is not being funded by the people causing the growth and that cost. Thank you for your service.
Next up, we have J.D. White.
Good evening. My name is J.B. White. I've been a 30-year resident of Athens, Clark County. I have seen the rise of our property taxes, and I know as a retiree that our retiree benefit and our Social Security does not quite keep up with the inflation that we have experienced in the last few years. So I'm here tonight only to make the statement, I oppose the opt-out of the homestead exemption for Clark County Board of Education. I'm sorry, my voice is... For Clark County Board of Education, House Bill 581. On 11/5/24, 60% of Georgia voters voted yes to this House Bill 581. I would like to see that my yes vote would be honored and not nullified. Thank you.
Up next is Steve Middlebrook.
Dr. Hooker and board members, I would first of all say it's disappointing that we have 4 missing tonight for something so important, but you're here, so that's all that counts, I'm sure. But I'm sure also the flagpole is here, and I'll divert and then come right back to it. I was accused of being a Republican activist, and I've got to say that I've voted for 4 black Democrats, from Dexter Fisher to Stephanie Johnson to Patrick Davenport to Alveda Thornton. So I'm not an activist, I'm a tax-paying citizen, and I would, again, just reiterate what the lady just said before me, that we've already spoken, your constituents have already spoken, of the 62% that voted for it. I had the pleasure of having lunch with Speaker of the House, John Burns, who made an interesting comment to me when we were talking about school board and surpluses, and he made the statement, unsolicited, that the public school boards in Georgia have more excess and surplus funds than the entire state of Georgia. That struck me between the eyes. So anyway, when I investigate the role of the local school board, the first sentence was profound and accurate, and it said, I quote, "The local school board are guardians and stewards of public trust." And what power does the local school board have? Understandably, you definitely have much power. But it further states, quote, "As such, community members can bring their concerns, even propose policies to the school board and superintendent." I'll be there tomorrow morning, Dr. Hooker, at the mentor program. I support any and everything I possibly can in public schools, but I do wish you would follow the will of your constituents. Thank you.
Up next is Sandy Metz.
First, I want to say I appreciate the conversation you had earlier today and the questions the board had. I'm here to encourage you to opt into House Bill 581. I began my career as a classroom teacher. I've worked as a building administrator at the district level and even at the Georgia Department of Education. I'm going to ask you some rhetorical questions during my time. I would like to encourage you as board members to ask them of your superintendent if you do not know the answers. I'm going to assume that you're aware and knowledgeable of the following. House Bill 581 is known as the Property Tax Relief and Reform for Georgians. Clark County student population is 100% economically disadvantaged according to the data from the Georgia Department of Education. The group you will impact the most by opting out is your economically disadvantaged families and those living on fixed incomes. In the first week of Georgia's legislative session in 2025, House Bill 27 was announced. House Bill 27 will provide an additional 25% in QBE basic education funding formula for each student living in poverty to create an opportunity wage. Has your superintendent or your staff mentioned this? I didn't hear it tonight. They're going to increase it by 25%. Ask them to do the calculations and see how much money this would mean for Clark County schools. House Bill 92 was also announced. House Bill 92 delays the deadline for localities to opt out of the statewide homestead exemption created under House Bill 581 from March to May 2025. This is because the regulations for House Bill 581 have not even been rolled out yet. If we postpone this decision to opt out or opt in, we'll have more knowledge of how House Bill 581 will be implemented. Schools can increase the millage rate, which I personally prefer because it's a more transparent tax. As Senator Gooch stated, meaning school districts, have kept the millage rate the same because what they have done is a backdoor tax with appraisal values. I'm just curious, since Mr. Miller-Brooks mentioned surplus funds, that if you know that Clark County has about $48 million in surplus funds at this time. First, there's a lot of fear of having no money. You say you lost Title I funds, school vouchers. You didn't mention the COVID funds are stopping this year. So this knee-jerk reaction is usually, we gotta let teachers go, as I heard in your conversation earlier, but that's not true. I first would ask for a detailed accounting of everything that COVID funds were supporting, each program, each project, each person that was hired, and do a true data analysis as how they impact school children's success. I did data analysis for most of my career. You can do that. If somebody hit the mustard, they need to go. Thank you.
Next up is Rita Raines.
The weather last week was something else, wasn't it? We had school for a day and a half. That half day was called after the school day had began. We just thought we would have that anticipated normal schedule, but surprise, we didn't. That came out of left field for all of us, didn't it? Or was it expected and we weren't listening to the correct forecast model? This is very similar to trying to implement a budget that includes anticipated property tax bills. Much like the weather forecast, we seek information concerning our financial futures. We try to plan ahead for what may hit us. We may do several things based on those forecasts. We plan based on what is expected. And it can lead to a whole lot of finger pointing or even negative balances in our checking account when we have to pay a bill that is staggeringly higher than expected. Which is why I want you all to decline to opt out of HB581. We as community members need to have a clue what we can expect, especially when it comes to personal finance. We cannot plan on how to work within our budgets if the increase in property tax is completely out of the range of what is seen as reasonable. Hello, I'm Rita Raines. I have worked for the Clark County School District full-time since 2008. As a special education paraprofessional, I realize that supporting House Bill 581 could be viewed as counterintuitive to my own best interests. As you have just heard, it pays my salary. However, I do not necessarily view this as counterproductive, as my future objective of living independently in this area is the outcome I see for myself.
I don't want to be an old lady retiree from the state in this district that is placing ads for multiple complete stranger roommates just to meet my minimum monthly needs. I will not always be an employee of the school district, but I do plan to live in Athens, Clarke County as a person that may own a home for my entire lifetime. I encourage you to lean into your constituency base and to honor the majority of those that voted in the general election on November 4th in favor of a predictable possibility of property tax increases. I would also like to add, and I'm not being mean here, I was very confused about the announcements on the website that said both the district intends to opt out as well as the board's vote is not predetermined, because these things do not mean the same thing. Thank you so much.
Up next is Russ Carlson.
Yes, I would like to say that I oppose opting out of 581. And we've lived in Athens for 37 years, and I don't remember my property taxes going down in 37 years. And the one time now that I'm aware of all the time that I've heard that the state has decided to put some sort of a governing regulation on these taxes, and the large majority of the people of the state, perhaps the county, as far as I know, voted in favor of it, and you choose to ignore it. I don't think that's a correct thing to do. So I'm urging you to not opt out of Bill 581. Thank you.
And Cheryl Carlson.
Thank you. I just have some rhetorical questions as well. How will more money pouring into our schools improve the results and education of the students at our schools? And where will the bulk of the money be used? Why go against the will of over 60% of those who voted against this? Thank you.
Up next, Wendy Judd, I think is what? Okay. Linda Krotke.
Yes, good evening. I'm Linda Krotke. Heard a lot of fear-mongering from tonight. We won't have enough money for this, won't have enough money for that. We're getting cut here, we're getting cut there, and I don't think that's actually as true a statement as it sounded. I looked at this revenue loss estimate that was put out, and just a couple of observations. In 2018, your current revenue was $17 million. In 2024, it was over $30 million. Within that time, in 2022, our property rates went up nearly 19%. In 2023, they went up an additional 19%. They are still that high. And you're gaining tax from all of that over-assessment. It's a lot of money. House Bill 581 was put together by legislators because they recognized the terrible strain these exorbitant home prices were causing homeowners because of increased taxation. They realized also that counties and municipalities were gaining these receipts. You've been gaining these receipts. You have them listed here for years past. HB 581 was designed to be tax relief on a struggling population living in inflated times. Please accept it as that. Any group of non-thinking buffoons can find a reason to spend money that is given to them. And there doesn't have to be any thoughtful reflection on that spending. It's just, oh, let's get more money, let's spend. It takes well-meaning, thoughtful, and resourceful people to carefully and wisely spend thriftily and efficaciously. Please do right by the people who elected you. Help the homeowners who are being overtaxed due to housing prices over which they have no control. Please do not opt out of House Bill 581. Thank you.
Jeb Bradbury.
At our last hearing, Mr. Denson gave some figures, and I would like some clarification of the 60-something thousand renters in town. How many are UGA students? How many are in government housing? How many are subsidized by the government Section 8 and Section 42, etc.? I ask these questions as most student parents can afford rent. The government subsidizes people. The government absorbs most, if not all, of the increase in rent. Having said that, the bigger question is, what does that have to do with you? You have one job, and that is educating students, period. You don't have a dog in the fight for affordable housing. If you have that, go run for mayor. If you're supposed to be creating affordable housing, then we should have a conversation about you cutting your budget. That's how you create affordable housing. The increase in property tax revenue on the opt-in on 581 will still be several $1 million. For some reason, your conversation last week got off track about cutting programs like Title I. This is simply just not the case. You will have more than enough revenue to fund everything you did this year. The CPI index over the last 12 months was 2.9%, so your increase would be almost a full percentage point higher than the 2% that Mr. Griner just told you about. This effectively cuts your revenue loss down to about $300,000 or $400,000, not the $1 million plus you're being told. The only figure on the revenue side we don't know about is what the digest increase is going to be. He used a 5% increase. Being in the real estate business, I believe the increase will be higher. If you hold the line on your spending and just the stuff that you have to increase, the stuff he just told you about, insurance, retirement, etc., you might have enough to even reduce the millage rate for all property owners. I've heard that you're just following what every system around us is doing. First, be a leader. Second, Athens has a lot more commercial and non-homesteaded properties than any county around us, probably more than most in the state. If you insist on this argument, then I'm going to insist that we reduce our annual per student spending to their levels and reduce the millage rate to the levels of the counties around us. The average millage rate in the state is below 15 mills, and we're at 18.8. I would like to point out that you gave away $113 million to the mall tax allocation district. I don't know which of y'all were on the board then, but it happened. Over $3 million per year over 30 years. You gave a local billionaire that kind of tax break, and now the common people vote, and you just thumb your nose in the air. Who are you?
Jim Bradbury. Oh, sorry, Jim Barry.
Thank you for allowing me to speak to you this evening. My name is Jim Barry. I am a Clark County resident, a homeowner, and a parent of a freshman at Clark Central. I'm here to encourage you to opt out of the tax cap under HB 581. I have 3 points to make. First, as we've heard, the cap allows assessments to increase with the rate of inflation, which we are all assuming is the consumer price index. As we've heard, this is problematic because the costs of the district do not follow the CPI. In particular, the largest cost of the district is staff benefits, staff costs and staff benefits, and in particular, healthcare costs. Healthcare costs, as we know, often increase much faster than the rate of inflation. So in the end, this implies that under the cap, the district will not be able to maintain the same millage rate without laying off teachers and cutting services. Second, as we know from decades of research that improved quality of education leads to many desirable outcomes, such as increased income, a more skilled workforce, reduced crime, and a better quality of life for the whole community, among many others. Research also shows that a robust funding of public schools, in particular spending on teachers, which is the largest expense of the school district, is key to better education outcomes. And by the same token, starving a district of funds will do exactly the opposite. And finally, as you've heard from many, many say that because 62% of Clark County residents approved HB 581, then opting out of the cap goes against the will of the voters. This is incorrect. The bill states on the first page that localities can either accept the cap or opt out. And in fact, the opt-out language was on the ballot as well. The wording of the bill itself on the ballot was incredibly confusing, but the opt-out language was not. Therefore, choosing to opt out is entirely consistent with what the voters decided in November. So I would encourage you to support education in this community by opting out. Thank you again for your time.
Shelby Branch.
Hello, I'm Shelby. I represent the Athens-Clarke County Democrat Committee. We are opposed to HB 581 because it significantly decreases revenue for the school district. So we urge the board to opt out. Thank you.
Joan Roden.
I speak for hundreds who are unable to come tonight, or the ones who don't even know that they are about to get the bad apple. The opt-out clause is foremost. The opportunity for those who voted to clearly observe the hubris of the boards of education all over Georgia, attempting to override the will of the people. In essence, the board is refusing to listen to the voter. Your plan is to bypass the voter and the vote. For those who will become homeowners, you will render them a huge punch in the gut. You have de facto canceled the public. Opt-out is the part of the amendment that signals to everyone the Clark County Board of Education is waving a bright red flag that proclaims the will of the people is inconsequential to us, and we refuse to bow to the will of the people, period. Do you understand the meaning of no? The public voted in an emphatic and democratic no on Election Day. Clarity is not needed unless you define the word no is different from the English language. Your opt-out plan is cancel culture at its finest, but it is not going to age well. When $19,000 a year per student is not enough, that's approximately $2,000 a month. Parents have to ask themselves, how much more are they going to ask us to cough up? The heavy hand of educational bureaucracy has had its chance, and the pendulum has swung to the maximum displacement of its swing. People are fed up. The reason we voted to adopt the homestead exemption is that we absolutely do understand clearly what it implies. Let's get this straight. You want more of our money to continue doing what we're asking you not to do. 62% of voters in Clark County have sent a categorically clear message. The quality of the product is not keeping pace with the burden on taxpayers. We cannot unsee what we see, no matter how clever the sleight of hand. The people you appear to be lecturing have seen over a number of years that they are not getting their money's worth. School choice, school vouchers are looking better by the minute, and this is School Choice Week. By the way, the public voted for that as well. Thank you for my 3 minutes. Actually, the United States Constitution doesn't mention a time limit, does it? The public knows why you limit comments to a meager 3 minutes. The truth is hard to hear. Thank you.
Gordon Roden.
Let me say, I am so glad I attended this meeting tonight. Through the years in Clark County, I've attended many commission meetings, I've attended many school board meetings, but tonight is the first time I've ever heard a commissioner or a board member say, I'm confused on this issue. Thank you for your God-honest honesty. You know, I appreciate that. I think we're all confused. And if it is true, and I guess the attorneys can dig into this and see, if there is an extension given before this decision has to be made, I would recommend to you to take that extension and spend more time listening to your constituents, listening to the people who are willing to come out to the board meetings. You know, and I'm sure you get the emails and everything else. But we voted for this, and I recommend for you to implement what the citizens of Clark County voted for. Thank you for your time.
Chris Byrne.
Good evening, Dr. Hooker, members of the board, and fellow citizens. I'm here tonight to strongly urge you to not opt out. In the past few years, our taxes in Athens have risen disproportionately to inflation by significant amounts, putting families, especially low income and disabled, who do not get the benefit of exemption SC senior citizens get, being priced out of their homes, become unaffordable. This new law is designed to protect homeowners by limiting valuation increases to inflation, yet CCD wants to opt out while sitting on an approximate operating fund surplus of $49 million, which I just confirmed with the CFO is about the right number right now. $49 million sitting in the bank. The reasoning, a narrative based on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, claiming it could unfairly shift the tax burden to businesses and income-producing rental properties. This is the classic use of FUD to advocate for a position where the real FUD comes from lack of transparency and true candor from CCSD officials over the years. I cannot speak for others. I'm not arguing that school taxes are not important. But we have watched and grit our teeth as the school district has wasted our tax dollars each and every year. The first time I met a former superintendent was in the auditorium at Clark Central High School. I expected he might ask about our experience with the school and the school system as parents. Instead, the only thing he asked was for our votes in East Bloss funding, to build a black box theater at CCHS that would allow drama students to mount smaller plays, and over $1 million to provide laptops for every student. What happened? The theater was never used for performances. It's being used for storage and set construction, not for the intended purpose we voted for the tax dollars for. The laptop program was doomed to failure because it did not factor in the costs for lost equipment and support replacement costs for damaged equipment that would have to come from the operating funds. These are just a couple examples of how CCSD has mismanaged taxpayer dollars. Some more. Millions have been wasted on unnecessary school rebuilding projects like Clark Middle School well before what should have been the end of their useful life. And we've seen the results of shoddy construction work after the fact. Clark Central, where I grew up, the local governments have been facing challenging economic headwinds for every year, using buildings over 100 years old because they maintain them and adjust them as needed. They don't tear them down and build all new schools. We have seen superintendents prioritize personal accolades over addressing systemic problems. One spent more time traveling to conferences and earning awards than solving district challenges. In fact, I had to track him down to a parking lot in Los Angeles to deal with the critical time-sensitive school disenrollment issue that was countered in a statement he made me earlier in the year. Another alienated the community, brought in cronies, and left with a generous severance package, all at taxpayer expense. Remember, $49 million surplus sitting there. We have seen the school district throw more money at curricula changes that were unnecessary, and then more money is spent rolling them back to old curricula. Meanwhile, teachers in non-AP and advanced classrooms struggle to get the resources they need to serve the students effectively.
Sir, your time is up.
I'll come back next week to finish the second half.
All right, we'll see you then.
Thank you.
Aaron Jocelyn. Jocelyn.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Jocelyn. I'm a resident of Athens, Clarke County. I would like to urge you all to opt out of the HB581. All taxes are a moral choice. We are choosing whether we are investing in our communities or not. I believe that educating next generation is a moral obligation of the current generations, and providing the financing necessary to educate children is our moral obligation. We can debate the mechanisms for how those taxes are raised to fund education, and stifling a mechanism to fund schools does not, in fact, improve education. We've had several speakers highlight disparities in funding and whatnot. But the one thing that stood out to me was that our school district is actually employing 1/10 of, or the student ratio to social workers and psychologists is more than 10 times less than what it should be. And that should be coming from the tax base and revenue raised through things such as increases in local property taxes. Thank you for your time, and have a good evening.
Okay. And I think this is Annie Gibbon.
I'd like to apologize for my handwriting. Well, thank you guys for having us all here tonight. I have a few points of concern. I'm a resident of Clarke County, and I don't have children, but I wanted to be here for some of my friends that do, but I couldn't make it tonight because they had to raise their children. So first of all, my concern is that the law, I think as some of us have discussed, it was written in a confusing way, and I don't really believe, especially a lot of people that I've talked to, when they saw the ballot initiative, they really had no idea what it was saying. So I find that concerning. I feel like if a ballot initiative is going to be put on the ballot, it should be written in a way that people can understand it more easily. But my main concern is going to be that the lost revenue for the school district. I understand that we're in hard times, and saving on property taxes would make a big difference for a lot of people here tonight. But I am honestly troubled by the lack of addressing the issues for the children in this district that I've heard tonight. There's already a homesteading exemption, to my knowledge, for people who are age 65 and older in the county. And I understand that we would like to save money on our taxes. I really do. I'm a renter. I know what it's like to be a little low income and try to make ends meet, but I don't believe that we need to be saving on our taxes at the expense of the children in this district. I think that we should be investing in our schools to make our community better and help the kids out a little more. And specifically the millage rate, to my knowledge, the current millage rate is 18.8 and the cap is 20. So I've heard some talk about increasing the millage rate, but I don't see that making up the difference. Board Member Denson has cited a $2 million deficit in the budget, and that's far too much. I'm so sorry. I encourage us to opt out. I don't believe that we need to be saving property taxes at the expense of the school district. I think that we can probably find a different way. But thank you guys for listening. My main concern is that the lost revenue would not be able to be made up. In other municipalities, we could do a sales tax, which unfortunately disproportionately harms lower income groups. But this has been a little bit troubling tonight because I haven't really heard a lot of discussion about how this is actually going to impact the school district and the students and the families who go there. So I encourage us to opt out. Thank you guys.
So that concludes the individuals that I have listed on my document of sign-ups. Are there individuals here who did not sign up who wish to come up and speak? Okay, sir, with your hand raised, and then in the very back, there's a gentleman with his hand raised. You can come after that, and then we will conclude for the night.
Hey everyone, it's good to be here and see a bunch of people that I actually sort of recognize on the school board. Good to see all of y'all. I'm a concerned citizen. My name is Barrett Binder, and I want to talk about this plan on the merits of the plan as it's been described. So if we think back to the PowerPoint, I understand that the majority of the cash flow for the school district comes from the property tax. I think the number on there was about 57%. Presumably, if we switch to the new plan and we start going by the what's the word when things get more expensive? Inflation. If we start going by the inflation rate, presumably as this happens year over year, the inflation rate is lower than the tax rate, the inflation rate is lower than the tax rate, the inflation rate is lower than the tax rate. Presumably year over year, we're actually losing more and more money out of this potential change. So if we decide that the school needs to be funded, which I hope we do, and we decide that we're going to keep spending the same amount of money, we're going to have to raise that money elsewhere. And my understanding is that that will come from a sales tax. So it seems like we're taking money, we're giving money to homeowners, so people who have already made it financially, and we're changing that tax into a sales tax, which will strip money from everyone equally. So it sounds like the poorer people, the people who are renting, which I heard was the majority of the people in Athens, actually end up losing money if we opt in. I would also mention that we cannot renege once we opt in. It sounds like I heard someone else talk about the times being unpredictable, and I totally agree. I think that if we are to have any semblance of ability to continue to fund our schools, we need to cling to every ability that we have, and this situation sounds like we're going to be taking money out of poor people's pockets and putting it into rich people's pockets by changing from a property tax to a sales tax. Thank you. I urge us to opt out.
And there was an individual in the, yes. And that will be our last public comment for the evening. And if you could, sir, please state your name so we can get that down on our list. I got you, Barrett Binder, correct? Okay, I got you.
Good evening. I guess I get the last word, which is not how I planned this. But, my name is Paul Van Valkenburg. I've been a resident here about 5 years in Athens, Clark. But one thing, I'm 75 years old. A couple years ago, my dad died, and he was 98. And if I have any luck, I've got 20 to 25 years to go. And my concern is having the school district have resources to take care of our children so they can grow up to be productive adults in our community. And that's why I would urge you to opt out of this so that we don't lose resources that we could have to educate our children. Thank you.
And that was Paul Van Valkenburg. Did I get that right? Okay, wonderful. Okay. All right, that concludes our list of public comment for this evening. Just as a reminder, we have our third hearing on February the 6th. That's next Thursday, same time, same place. Thank you so much.